Anxious Attachment Recovery Workbook. Stop overthinking, calm relationship anxiety, build secure bonds, and cultivate lasting self-love. A step-by-step healing guide by Daphne Reyes. Introduction. The rooms were white. Not a soft, creamy white, but a cold, sharp color that seemed to push against the eyes. In the mid-1940s, hospitals and orphanages in the United States and South America believed they had found the secret to keeping children healthy: perfect cleanliness. The air smelled of harsh soap and bleach. Every surface was scrubbed until it shone. The nurses wore stiff, starched uniforms and moved with quiet speed. They followed a strict rule of no touch. They believed that picking up the babies, rocking them, or even smiling too much would spread germs. The goal was to keep the children safe from the outside world by keeping them in a bubble of science. Inside those sterile rooms, rows of iron cribs stood like small cages. The infants were fed on a perfect schedule. They were bathed, changed, and given the best medicine available. By the logic of the time, these babies should have been the healthiest in the world. But something terrifying was happening. Despite the clean air and the steady food, the babies began to wither. They didn't just get sick. They stopped growing. They stopped making sounds. Their skin turned a pale grayish color. They would stare at the ceiling with wide, hollow eyes, their tiny bodies becoming thin and brittle. A doctor named Renee Spitz walked through these wards and saw a tragedy that didn't make sense to his colleagues. He watched as babies who had everything needed for survival simply gave up on life. They died by the dozens. In some of these perfect, germ-free nurseries, the death rate was nearly 37%. Spitz realized the babies weren't dying from a virus or a lack of vitamins. They were dying of loneliness. He called this hospitalism. He proved to a shocked medical world that a human being cannot survive on bread and water alone. We need the warmth of a hand. We need the sound of a voice. We need to feel that we belong to someone. This discovery changed everything. It proved that connection is not a nice-to-have luxury. It is a biological requirement. It is as vital as the air in your lungs. The invisible threat: you might feel a long way from those white, silent hospital wards, but your brain hasn't forgotten that lesson. For someone struggling with anxious attachment, the fear of losing a connection feels exactly like a threat to survival. When you text someone you love and see that they are active but haven't replied, a physical change happens inside you. Your heart might start to hammer against your ribs. Your stomach might drop, leaving a cold, empty hole behind. Your mind begins to race, spinning a web of what-ifs that get darker with every passing minute. Maybe they are bored with me. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe they realized I'm too much to handle. Maybe they are talking to someone better. It is your brain sounding a 4-alarm fire. Because your biological hardware is programmed to believe that being alone equals death. It treats a slow reply or a shift in a partner's tone like a tiger in the room. You spend your days acting as an emotional detective. You look for clues in the way they say hello. You analyze the length of their texts. You scroll through their social media, looking for likes or follows that might signal they are drifting away. It is exhausting. It feels like you are walking on a frozen lake, waiting for the ice to crack under your feet at any second. You aren't doing this because you are crazy or dramatic. You are doing this because your internal safety system is turned up too high. You are stuck in a cycle where you need closeness to feel safe. But the very act of seeking that closeness often feels like it's pushing people away. The goal of this journey isn't to stop wanting love. You don't have to become a cold, distant person who doesn't care about others. The goal is to build an internal safety that doesn't vanish the moment someone walks out of the room. By the time you finish this workbook, you will be a secure anchor. Think about an anchor for a moment. When a storm hits the ocean, the waves toss the boat in every direction. But the anchor stays deep, buried in the solid ground far below the surface. The boat moves, but it doesn't drift away. It isn't lost. Becoming a secure anchor means you will have the tools to calm your own nervous system. You will learn to feel a sense of worth that belongs to you, not to your partner's opinion of you. You will be able to say what you need and set firm boundaries, without the paralyzing fear that doing so will cause someone to leave. You will move from being an emotional detective, always hunting for signs of rejection, to being someone who knows they are worthy of being kept. This isn't just a dream or a set of nice ideas. This is based on the hard science of how our brains are wired. Just as those babies in the 1940s needed touch to survive, your brain needs new experiences to heal. We are going to use history, neuroscience, and practical exercises to rewire the paths in your mind. Meet Elena. Elena Rodriguez is 32 years old and lives in Austin, Texas. If you saw her at her job, you would think she had everything under control. She is a lead UI/UX designer for a tech startup. Her office is on a rooftop, overlooking the city, and she spends her days making complex apps look simple and beautiful. She is creative, smart, and deeply kind. But at 11:45 on a Tuesday night, Elena is not the confident leader her coworkers see. She is sitting on her sofa in her minimalist apartment. The only light comes from her phone. She is looking at her message to Mark, a freelance architect she has been dating for 4 months. "How was your day?" she sent at 7 p.m. Mark hasn't replied. But Elena can see he was active on Instagram 10 minutes ago. Her chest feels tight, like a heavy weight is sitting on her lungs. She has already drafted 3 different messages in her head. One is a joke to see if he's alive. One is an angry demand for his attention. One is a sad apology for being annoying. She knows she is spiraling. She knows she should just go to sleep, but her brain won't let her. It tells her that if she doesn't fix this right now, Mark will drift away, and she will be left in the silence. She spends the next hour looking at the list of people Mark recently followed on social media. She is looking for a reason for the silence, a pattern she can solve. Elena believes that if she isn't perfectly available and emotionally intuitive, people will realize she is a burden and leave her. She feels like she has to earn her place in every relationship she has. Elena is tired. She is tired of the what-ifs. She is tired of feeling like her happiness is a remote control held by someone else. She wants to be the kind of woman who can see a delayed text and think, "He must be busy," and then go back to her book. Throughout this book, we are going to follow Elena as she learns to put down the detective's magnifying glass and pick up the anchor. The path ahead, the road from anxious to secure, is a path people have been walking for a long time. We aren't going to walk it alone. We are going to take lessons from those who understood the human heart in ways we are only now beginning to prove with science. We will look at the work of Mary Ainsworth, the woman who first sat in small homes in Uganda and watched how mothers and babies connected. She was the first to name the anxious style and show us that it isn't a flaw, but a strategy for survival. We will learn from Abraham Lincoln. Most people think of him as a man of iron, but he was a man of deep, painful sensitivity. He struggled with a melancholy that nearly broke him during his engagement to Mary Todd. We will see how he used his sensitivity to lead a nation through a war, and how he used letters to calm his own hot emotions. We will find strength in the words of Viktor Frankl. He survived the darkest places a human could go, and discovered that there is a space between what happens to us and how we react. In that tiny space, we find our freedom. Here is how we will get there. First, we will understand your smoke detector. We'll look at the part of your brain called the amygdala and why it keeps screaming fire when there is only a little smoke. We will practice the pause. You will learn how to find that space Frankl talked about so you don't send the text you'll regret later. We will build your secure base. You will learn the 3 pillars that keep you steady even when a relationship feels shaky. We will tackle the digital spiral. We'll look at how things like texting and social media are the kryptonite of the anxious heart and how to handle them. Finally, we will learn sovereignty. You will discover how to be a whole, complete person who is married to yourself first, so you can love others without losing your soul. You might feel like your brain is hardwired to be this way forever. You might think you were born with a heart that is just too loud. But science has a beautiful word for us: neuroplasticity. It means the brain can change. It can heal. It can learn a new way to be. Just as the babies in those orphanages could recover if they were finally held and loved, your nervous system can learn that it is safe. You don't have to live in a state of high alert anymore. A life of calm, secure, and lasting love is not just for other people. It is for you. Chapter 1. Why do we search for danger in love? In 1954, a woman named Mary Ainsworth arrived in Kampala, Uganda, with a clipboard and a question that most of her male peers thought was a waste of time. At 41 years old, Mary was not the type of person who set out to turn the world of psychology upside down. She was quiet, observant, and possessed a deep, patient curiosity. While other researchers were busy in labs measuring how fast rats could run through mazes, Mary wanted to see how love worked in the real world. She spent months climbing into the back of a Land Rover, bouncing over dusty roads to reach small villages. She didn't go there to give advice or to tell mothers how to raise their children. Instead, she sat on the floor of their homes, often near a cooking fire, and simply watched. She watched how mothers talked to their babies. She watched how babies reacted when their mothers walked out of the room to fetch water or wood. Most importantly, she watched what happened when those mothers came back. At the time, the leading experts believed that babies only loved their mothers because mothers provided food. It was a cold, mechanical view of human life. They thought that if you kept a baby fed, clean, and warm, the baby would be fine. But Mary saw something different. She noticed that the food babies were hungriest for wasn't milk. It was a specific kind of attention. She tracked 28 families with an intensity that bordered on the obsessive. She noticed that some mothers were like a steady, warm sun. When the baby cried, they responded. When the baby smiled, they smiled back. These babies were calm. They felt safe enough to crawl away and explore a new toy because they knew that if they got scared, their home base was solid. But there was another group of mothers who caught Mary's eye. These mothers weren't mean or neglectful in the traditional sense. In fact, they could be very loving. The problem was that they were inconsistent. One day they might be incredibly cuddly and attentive. The next day, they might be distracted, tired, or emotionally distant. They were hot and cold. Mary watched the babies of these hot and cold mothers very closely. These infants didn't just give up when their mothers became distant. Instead, they did something fascinating and heartbreaking. They became tiny detectives. They stopped playing with their toys. They stopped exploring. Instead, they spent every ounce of their energy watching their mothers. They became hyper-aware of every movement, every change in tone, and every shift in the room. If the mother moved toward the door, the baby would scream louder than the other infants. They weren't just crying, they were sounding an alarm. They had learned that because their mother's attention was a limited and unpredictable resource, they had to be loud to make sure they weren't forgotten. Mary called this the preoccupied strategy. It was the birth of what we now call anxious attachment, the inconsistency loop. What Mary Ainsworth discovered in those Ugandan villages was a survival blueprint that many of us still carry today. When a caregiver's love feels like a sometimes thing, the brain makes a very logical, very exhausting decision. It decides that safety can only be found by staying as close as possible to the source of love and monitoring it for any sign of trouble. This creates a mental framework called the inconsistency loop. It has three main parts that act like a gear system in the mind. The unpredictable signal. This is the stimulus. It's the moment your partner doesn't text back, or a parent looks away while you're talking, or a friend seems off. Because you have a history of love being inconsistent, your brain views this small gap in connection as a total emergency. The hypervigilant scan. This is the detective work. Your brain starts looking for patterns. Why did they use a period instead of an exclamation point? Why are they active on social media, but not replying to me? You begin to scan the environment for smoke that might indicate a fire of rejection. The protest behavior. This is the alarm. Just like the babies in Uganda who cried louder to get their mothers to stay, you might send 3 texts in a row, or pick a fight just to get a reaction, or test your partner to see if they still care. When you are stuck in this loop, you aren't being dramatic or crazy. You are actually using a very old survival skill. In the wild, a baby who is ignored might not survive. For someone with an anxious attachment style, the feeling of being disconnected feels like a threat to their very existence. The brain doesn't see a late text, it sees a lost lifeline. This is exactly what was happening to Elena Rodriguez on a Tuesday night in Austin. Elena is a 32-year-old designer who can solve complex tech problems for a startup, but she cannot solve the problem of a 3-hour silence from a guy named Mark. Mark had told her he was going to a late-night work event. Elena was sitting on her balcony, the humid Texas air sticking to her skin, staring at the glowing screen of her phone. She had already checked Mark's Instagram 3 times. She saw that he had liked a photo of a local taco truck 20 minutes ago. A cold spike of adrenaline shot through her chest. He has time to look at tacos, but not to tell me he's okay, she thought. Elena felt the familiar drop in her stomach. She began to draft a message. I guess you're too busy for me tonight. She hovered her thumb over the send button. In that moment, Elena was the baby in the Ugandan hut. She was looking for a way to sound the alarm, because the silence felt like a void she might fall into. She wasn't just annoyed. She was in a state of high-alert survival. Her brain had turned on its internal smoke detector, and it was screaming that the whole building was on fire, even though Mark was probably just holding a drink and talking about architecture. The science of the blank face. To understand why Elena's body reacted with such intensity, we have to look at how our brains are literally wired to read the people we love. Connection isn't just a nice feeling, it is a biological requirement. In the 1970s, a researcher named Dr. Edward Tronick took Mary Ainsworth's observations a step further with something called the still face experiment. The setup was simple and devastating. A mother would sit across from her baby and play with them, smiling, cooing, and responding to the baby's movements. The baby would be full of joy, wiggling and laughing. Then, the researcher would ask the mother to turn her head away. When she turned back, to keep her face completely blank. No smile, no frown, no expression at all, just a still face. The baby's reaction was almost instant. First, the baby would try to win the mother back. They would smile bigger, point at things, and reach out their tiny hands. When that didn't work, the baby would start to show signs of extreme stress. They would screech, arch their backs, and eventually, they would turn away and weep. The most important takeaway from this study wasn't that babies need smiles. It was that a blank or non-responsive face is actually more stressful to the human brain than a mean face. When someone we love becomes a still face, whether that's a literal blank stare or a figurative blank text message, our nervous system perceives it as a total collapse of safety. This is because humans are co-regulating creatures. Think of your nervous system like a battery that sometimes needs to be plugged into someone else to recharge. When we are around people who are responsive and warm, our heart rate slows down, our cortisol, stress hormone levels drop, and we feel regulated. For an anxious attacher, their battery doesn't hold a charge very well on its own. They are constantly looking for a power source in their partner. If that power source becomes unavailable or inconsistent, the anxious brain goes into a panic, trying to find a way to get the juice back. This is why you might feel like you can't breathe or think about anything else until you get that "everything is fine, honey" text. You aren't just being clingy, you are trying to regulate your own biology. The search for danger. If you grew up with inconsistent care, your brain eventually learned a very strange lesson. It is safer to be anxious than to be relaxed. This sounds backward, but think about it from the perspective of a detective. If a detective is looking for a criminal, they don't sit in a park and close their eyes. They stay on high alert. They look for clues in the shadows. For an anxious attacher, danger is the moment the other person leaves or stops loving them. If you are always searching for danger, you feel like you can never be blindsided. You think, if I can just predict that they are going to leave me, it won't hurt as much when they do. You start to treat your relationship like a crime scene where you are looking for evidence of a future abandonment. This creates a personality trait called hypervigilance. It's like having a superpower that you never asked for and that makes you miserable. You can notice a shift in your partner's breathing from across the room. You can tell if they are annoyed by the way they set their keys on the counter. You are an expert at reading the weather of other people's emotions. The problem is that because you are so focused on finding danger, you often find it even when it isn't there. You misinterpret a tired sigh as a sign of boredom with the relationship. You see a short email as a sign that your boss is about to fire you. Your smoke detector is so sensitive that it goes off every time someone lights a birthday candle. Mary Ainsworth noticed this in her later years of research as well. She realized that these anxious resistant patterns weren't just about childhood. They became internal working models, like a map of the world that we carry in our pockets. If your map says people are unpredictable, you will spend your whole life looking for the cracks in the ground. The brave heart. It is easy to look at this anxious way of living and feel ashamed. We live in a culture that tells us we should be independent and self-sufficient. We are told that needing is a weakness. But the truth is, needing care and connection is part of what makes us human. It takes a brave heart to admit that, and to learn how to regulate ourselves. Someone else is a sign of weakness. But if we look back at the history of human survival, we see a different story. In the 1950s, while Mary Ainsworth was in Uganda, another researcher named Harry Harlow was conducting primate studies that proved just how vital touch and connection were. He found that baby monkeys would choose a soft cloth mother over a wire mother that provided food every single time. They would literally starve themselves just to have something warm to cling to. This tells us that your desire for closeness isn't a flaw in your character. It is a biological imperative. The reason you search for danger in love is that love is the most important thing you have. Your brain is trying to protect your most valuable asset. The anxious strategy was actually a very brave choice made by your younger self. Imagine a child who realizes their parent is distracted or inconsistent. That child has two choices: give up and shut down, or try harder to get noticed. The anxious child chooses to try harder. They choose to keep fighting for connection. Your anxiety is not a sign that you are broken. It is a sign that you are a fighter. It is a sign that you value connection so much that you are willing to stay awake at night worrying about it. The goal of this journey isn't to stop being someone who values love. The goal is to learn that you don't have to be a detective to keep it. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't have to scan for smoke every second of the day. As Elena sat on her balcony in Austin, she took a deep breath. She looked at the draft of the angry text she was about to send to Mark. She realized, for the first time, that she wasn't actually mad at Mark for liking a photo of a taco truck. She was scared. She was the baby in the hut, crying out because the silence felt like she was being forgotten. She deleted the draft. She didn't send a test message. Instead, she put her phone face down on the table. She looked up at the Texas stars. For a moment, the smoke detector in her brain kept ringing, but she chose to sit with the noise without running out of the building. She was beginning to realize that the danger she was searching for wasn't in Mark's silence. It was a ghost from her past, a map that no longer fit the world she was living in today. We search for danger in love because we are trying to survive. But once we realize that we are already safe, we can finally stop being detectives and start being partners. The search for danger can finally turn into a search for peace. Chapter 2: The Amygdala, Your Internal Smoke Detector. From 1,000 feet in the air, a city at rush hour looks like a giant, pulsing machine. You can see the patterns clearly. Thousands of tiny metal boxes crawl along gray lines. People swarm in and out of glass towers like ants following invisible trails. Most of these movements are predictable. The lights turn green, and the cars move. The sun goes down, and the lights blink on. But every once in a while, the pattern breaks. A single car jerks to a stop for no apparent reason. A person on a crowded sidewalk freezes in place while everyone else flows around them like water around a stone. If you could zoom in close enough to see into the heart of that person standing still, you would find a storm. Their pulse is racing, their palms are damp, their eyes are darting back and forth, searching for a threat that no one else can see. To the rest of the world, nothing has happened. No lion has jumped out of the shadows. No alarm has sounded. But inside that person's head, a tiny almond-shaped part of the brain has just taken over the entire system. It has decided that a disaster is coming, and it has pulled the emergency brake on their life. For a long time, doctors and scientists didn't really understand why this happened. They thought the brain was a slow, logical machine that looked at the facts before it decided to be afraid. They believed we saw a danger, thought about it, and then felt fear. But in the mid-1990s, a researcher in New York City discovered that our brains are much faster and much more reactive than we ever imagined. He found the reason why we sometimes feel like we are dying of a broken heart just because someone didn't text us back. The secret path of fear. In 1996, the streets of Manhattan were loud, crowded, and full of the kind of energy that could make anyone feel a little on edge. Inside a laboratory at New York University, Joseph Ledoux was looking for something hidden deep inside the brain. He wasn't interested in how we do math or how we remember where we left our keys. He wanted to know how we feel. Specifically, he wanted to know why fear is so much stronger than almost any other emotion we have. Before Ledoux's work, the common belief was that all information from the outside world went to the thinking part of the brain first. The idea was that your eyes see a shape, your brain identifies it as a snake, and then you feel scared. It was a neat, orderly system. But Ledoux found a glitch in this order, a glitch that explains everything about why relationship anxiety feels so intense. He discovered that the brain actually has two different paths for processing what we see and hear. He called them the high road and the low road. The high road is the path of logic. When you hear a loud bang in the kitchen, the sound goes to a part of your brain called the thalamus. It travels up to the prefrontal cortex, the thinking cap of your brain. This part of the brain is smart, but slow. It looks at the sound, compares it to things you know, and realizes, oh, that was just a bag of chips falling off the counter. It sends a message down to calm your heart. The low road, however, is a shortcut. Ledoux discovered that some of that sound skips the thinking part of the brain entirely. It goes straight from the ear to the amygdala. The amygdala is a tiny ancient structure that has one job: keep you alive. It doesn't care about logic. It doesn't care if it's right or wrong. It only cares about speed. By the time your high road is still trying to figure out if the bag of chips is a threat, your low road has already flooded your body with adrenaline. Your heart is pounding before you even know why. Ledoux showed that the amygdala can trigger a full-body fear response in a fraction of a second. It is a biological shoot first, ask questions later system. This discovery changed how we look at anxiety. It proved that your feelings aren't always a choice. You aren't being dramatic or overreacting on purpose. Your brain is simply using a survival system that was designed millions of years ago to keep you from being eaten by tigers. The problem is that for an anxious attacher, the tiger isn't a wild animal. The tiger is the fear of being left alone. The smoke detector that never sleeps. To understand how the amygdala works in your daily life, it helps to think of it as a smoke detector. A smoke detector is a very simple machine. It doesn't have a camera to see if there is actually a giant fire in your kitchen. It only senses particles in the air. If it senses something that looks like smoke, it screams. It doesn't care if that smoke is coming from a house fire that will destroy everything you own, or if it's just a piece of bread you left in the toaster a few seconds too long. To the smoke detector, smoke is smoke. Its job is to be loud enough to wake you up, just in case. Your amygdala is the smoke detector of your soul. It is constantly scanning your partner's face, their tone of voice, and the timing of their messages. It is looking for smoke, any sign that they might be pulling away, or that you might be in trouble. The problem is that the amygdala is incredibly sensitive. If you grew up in a home where love was inconsistent, where a parent was warm one minute and cold the next, your smoke detector had to become super sensitive to stay safe. You had to learn to smell the smoke of a bad mood before the fire even started. You learned to read the tiny shift in a parent's eyes or the way they put a glass down on the table. Now, in your adult relationships, that smoke detector is still set to the highest possible sensitivity. When your partner gives you a short, one-word answer to a question, your amygdala doesn't see a tired human who had a long day at work. It sees smoke. It screams fire and sends your body into a state of total panic. Your thinking brain might try to tell you, they're probably just busy, but the thinking brain is on the high road. It's slow. The amygdala is on the low road, and it's already won the race. It has already made your stomach drop and your hands shake. This is what we call an amygdala hijack. The primitive part of your brain has taken the steering wheel, and the logical part of you is just a passenger in the back seat, watching the car drift toward a cliff. The meeting room panic. On a rainy Monday morning in Austin, Elena Rodriguez sat in a glass-walled meeting room. She was the lead UI/UX designer for a tech startup, and she was usually the person everyone looked to for calm, creative solutions. She was good at her job because she could see patterns that other people missed. She knew exactly where a button should go on a screen, so that a user would feel safe and guided. But that morning, Elena wasn't thinking about buttons or screens. Her phone sat face down on the table, but she could feel it vibrating in her mind. 10 minutes before the meeting started, she had received a text. It wasn't from Mark, the man she had been dating for 4 months. It was from her boss, Sarah. The message was short. "We need to talk later. My office at 4 o'clock. In that second, Elena's world shifted. She felt a cold drop in the pit of her stomach. Her heart began to thump against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked around the room. Her coworkers were laughing and drinking coffee, but to Elena, they felt miles away. She felt like she was underwater. The smoke detector in Elena's brain was screaming. It didn't matter that she had just finished a huge project ahead of schedule. It didn't matter that her last performance review was perfect. All her amygdala saw was the phrase, "We need to talk." In the world of an anxious attacher, those 4 words are the sound of a building collapsing. Throughout the meeting, Elena's brain was on the low road. She was stuck in a what-if loop. What if I'm getting fired? What if I made a mistake on the code and the whole app crashed? What if Sarah realized I'm not as good as she thought I was? This is the exhausting cost of hypervigilance. Elena wasn't just sitting in a meeting, she was fighting for her life against an invisible lion. Her body was pumping out cortisol and adrenaline, preparing her to run or fight. By 10:30 a.m., she was as tired as if she had run a marathon.